Right, okay, so welcome to the latest in the series of Standing in the Rubble, where we're looking at this new landscape, what's going on, what is God up to in the midst of this coronavirus, in the midst of this Black Lives Matter movement, in the midst of all the upheaval and change that we're seeing in this year, in 2020. What is God saying, and how do we position ourselves as a church, and how do we care for ourselves and look after ourselves, form ourselves in the midst of this? And today I am joined by Patrick Regan. So welcome, Patrick. Great to have you with us.
It's good to be here.
And Patrick, do you want to talk a little bit about your context, Kintsugi Hope, and the stuff that you do, and then we can get into a little bit of how that's been affected through this. But
yeah, sure. Yeah, no, it's great to be here. So me and my wife Diane, we started a charity called Kintsugi Hope 2 years ago, and Kintsugi is an interesting word. It's a Japanese word that means golden joinery. So I got my little bowl here. This is my Kintsugi bowl. If you take a bowl and you break it, there's a crack here, which is very hard to see because I've mended it with super glue. And the whole idea is, super glue, we hide the cracks, we pretend it's not broken. But what they do in Japan is they put a gold powder in the glue. So instead of hiding the cracks, you make a feature of the cracks. So arguably the object becomes more unique for being broken and certainly more beautiful. And I think the whole thing around Kintsugi Hope is that beauty does come out of brokenness, and which obviously for a time such as this is a really interesting message. We really wanted to tackle two issues: social isolation and mental health. And we did that by writing a 12-week program similar to Alcoholics Anonymous, but for well-being. And it gets delivered in small groups all over the country, and written in learning styles, looking at big issues that we're facing in our time, like anger, self-acceptance, anxiety, shame, depression, forgiveness. And it's just been incredible what God has done. It's just blowing us away, really. And we have signed up a different church to run a Kintsugi Wellbeing group every day since lockdown started. We've seen them on Zoom. We've seen them on other technology that I don't understand. We've seen them moving into gardens now, into parks now, into churches again now. People can go back into church. There's a few looking to go back. So I think it's been really interesting because loads of non-Christians have been approaching us and saying they really want to come to one of these things. And there's waiting lists everywhere for them as well, which is amazing. Incredible.
It's amazing, Patrick. And we run it. It runs in our church as well. We run Kintsugi Hope courses, but it does seem so timely for now. I mean, mental health. I think from our experiences, we've seen just a huge uprise in, particularly amongst young people. We've seen significant increase in mental health issues, but also, I think one of the patterns that I've observed as a church leader, as a community leader, I think when the directives were really clear from the government, stay home, people could kind of cope with that. But actually, as soon as that switched to stay alert, I saw anxiety issues rise in people. I saw mental health issues rise in people, uncertainty, like, well, I don't know, but then now the responsibility is on me to make sure I don't know what to do. And it had a massive impact on people's mental health. And I think I've seen the same thing in the last couple of weeks around those who are shielded, which again, up until now, the direction has been really clear from the government. You stay home, you're locked down for 12 weeks, that's it. And then as they've released it, actually the anxiety levels amongst people who shielded, but also their family members about, well, then what is allowed? What am I? And I've just seen people with increased anxiety and not even being able to understand why, not even being able to understand how, people who normally wouldn't regard themselves as struggling with mental health, suddenly finding themselves responding in ways that surprise themselves to situations. So, I mean, I assume you're seeing the same sort of thing around, but then how did Kintsugi Hope speak into that? How does that Kintsugi Hope fit for those sorts of things?
I mean, to be honest, I think it is a very challenging time because I agree with you, that is starting to happen now. I also think there's going to be more to come, and I think that all the mental health experts are saying that they expect that as lockdown eases even more, kids go back to school in September, there will be a tsunami of mental health issues. And I think that's why Kintsugi Hope has been saying to the church really clearly, get trained, be ready. Let's not get caught out. It's not rocket science. And, the fact is, it's a bit like a war. When you're in a war, PTSD and the other sort of health issues come afterwards. Adrenaline's running high. You're trying to work out how to cope, how to look after your friends, neighbors, older parents. And I think it's coming. I think the other thing that is really worrying is that when kids get back to school, that's when all the safeguarding issues will come out. Most safeguarding issues are spotted at school. Self-harm is often spotted at school. Abuse at home is often spotted at school. So I think most people, to be honest, in the mental health world are probably going, we're just not sure what we're dealing with. We've got a feeling that actually, there are stuff going on. We know domestic violence has increased. A police friend of mine says that you are never 100 yards away from a domestic violence case, which is incredible in a city. But even in the countryside, it isn't that much difference.
Right.
So it's huge. And that, on the Kintsugi course, we talk about anger. I've never heard a decent sermon on anger. I heard the odd one on Jesus and the money changers. But anger is an emotional response to pain. It tells you something's wrong, and Ecclesiastes is really clear. It says, anger could be a visitor, but don't let it become a resident. And so anger itself, there isn't so actually, it's a natural reaction, but how we deal with those issues is crucial at the moment. And I sort of feel like with the church, I feel like potentially we could do so much good. We're in every community across this country. We will outlast governments, and there's a transformation of someone's heart when they realize they're loved by God that no medicine could ever do. And so potentially we have an amazing chance here to love people, to get alongside people and help them, through a very difficult time. I think the other thing, and you'll find this as a church leader, is people have not been able to lament. I think N.T. Wright said quite rightly, we're lamenting not being able to lament. And how we allow people in this stage to grieve, the fact that you can only have 5 people, at the, in the past at a funeral service, there's going to have to be memorial services. I've got a friend who said goodbye to her mum on FaceTime, and there's got to be a chance to help people, and I think the church has got a really important role to play.
How do we make space for that? And I think absolutely echo what you're saying about mental health issues, domestic violence, safeguarding issues. We do a lot of work with families in the town, so we deliver a significant project in South Somerset around families in crisis, and we're seeing all those trends. Also, chair of government as a school, and again we've worked really hard, but we're very aware that in September when these kids come back, we're gonna see a lot more. But it's not just in our communities. There's stuff's in our churches. Just because we're Christians doesn't mean we're immune to depression, doesn't mean we're immune to anger, doesn't mean we're immune to domestic violence, doesn't mean we're immune to safeguarding issues like these. Let's not be naive and suggest these things aren't in our church. So do you have, what would you say to people who maybe have noticed that they're displaying more anger, or people who have noticed that they're maybe suffering with more depression or mental health issues generally? What would you say? Because sometimes we kind of think that, well, I'm a Christian, so I should be fine. I've got the answer, but that's not true always. We still struggle with these things.
Yeah, of course. I think the key thing, isn't it, with any mental health issue is that we all have them. We all have physical health. We've both got glasses on because our eyes aren't on 100%. And everyone has mental health issues. Every single person on the planet. And I think sometimes, for some reason, whereas in the church, I feel like sometimes we've done quite well in certain issues of social justice and education and poverty. but this mental health one, we haven't really cracked. But I think we've spiritualized it with there's some poor theology around it, and yet, you know, the Bible has got so much to say about it. I think the key thing is that lack of realizing that you are not on your own. I think it's so key, and the shame that comes with mental health. You know, Brené Brown, a famous research professor, says shame loves silence, secrecy, and judgment. And it has two gremlins. Who do you think you are, and you're not enough? And I think that actually what shame can't stand is empathy and understanding. And often when you talk about something, it loses half of its power because you start to realize that you're not on your own. And all the research shows, you know, that actually the fact is talking therapies, getting help, getting support, being honest, being real, are the most useful things, you know, and I think we have to take shame away. Sometimes medication is good. Other times it's often good when it's combined with some sort of talking and some support. Medication in its own has its place, but it's probably not going to help long term. So I think it's really important for the church to be really sensitive to understanding and to really listen to people, and people to feel really that approachable, you know. It's interesting, Adam, I'm doing a lot of research at the moment on trauma, and it's been quite a traumatic time for lots of people, and it's absolutely just blowing me away. It's a staggering amount of trauma that people face in their lives. And there's this research many years ago, which you're probably aware of, called ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences, looking at the impact that, you know, your childhood has on your when you are an adult, and particularly your physical health. Actually, it's incredible, the statistics, and the fact that you feel trauma in your body, you don't feel it in your head. The way you think about things can change, but actually it's in your body that you feel it. And that's why I feel like the holistic way which the church should offer, spiritually, emotionally, physically, mentally, it's the whole person that Jesus ministers to. I think if you take one of those out, you're missing the holistic picture, and that's why I think the church has got a massive role to play.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And it's probably worth me just saying at this point, if you're listening, and this is an area maybe you've noticed in yourself recently in this lockdown, like, do speak to your small group leader. We have a phone line that you can contact if you want to have someone to pray with you, listen to you, talk with. And the phone line, that's all that is on our website. But don't sit in silence. It's really interesting, that silence thing, actually, Patrick. It links to some thoughts that I've been turning around sin. Often we because sin links to shame very often in our mindset, because we have a legal framework, a context of sin, don't we? Oh, there's some rules there that we've broken, therefore God wants to punish us, but because of Jesus we're not, grace, etc. But actually, I think if we understand sin more than some sort of legal construct, because if we understand it's a legal construct, well, then forgiveness is also a bit of a construct, a bit of a concept. But actually, if we understand sin as all the ways in which we're broken, all the ways in which we're less than we were created to be, all the ways, the stuff that's been spoken over us, the stuff we've spoken over ourselves, the stuff that we've done, the stuff that's been done to us, the systems that have shaped us and formed us, well, then forgiveness is the rehumanizing, restoring, renewing. But also then confession isn't the listing of all the things we should be in trouble for. Confession is the beginning of healing, because confession is the speaking out of the brokenness, the pain, the dehumanization that's happened inside. So it's the beginning of healing. And I think often we think about confession as, well, why would anyone want to list all the things they've done wrong? Because it's linked to shame. Like, well, I'll be ashamed of to name everything that is sinful within me, whatever. But actually, if we understand sin as that less than we were created to be, the brokenness or the dehumanization, well, then confession is the beginning of healing, because it's when we speak that stuff out, which links to what you were saying about Brené Brown, who's amazing. But the shame loves silence. But actually, when we speak this stuff out, it's the beginning of the undoing of that. And so, I think just encouraging people to be able to speak out is great. But I think I'd love you to speak into what the bigger sense of maybe what's happening in our society at the moment. And we are very clear that we don't believe God creates coronavirus or whatever, but God uses all things. God works within all things to bring good. And what is God up to in this reshaping of our society, in this reshaping of our world, of our values, of give a sense of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you probably just said it really. I think there's a reshaping of values. I think values inform your behaviour, and it's interesting, isn't it, that within a week, our low-skilled workers became our key workers,
Right.
Yet they're still paid the same amount. And I think that there's a real sense of shaping values. I think coming out of this phase, we'll be going, actually, what's really important in life? You know, our education system, I think that needs to be reshaped. You know, I think that for too long, we have literally got a generation that are scared stiff because they might not get the statistic at the end of their all those years in education. If we are only preparing kids for statistics, then we've got something badly wrong.
Yeah,
and you know, we need to put people before programs, learning before statistics, character before charisma, kindness before achievement, and you know, people are saying we need to be given tools, well-being, you know, life skills. It just isn't working. We've got a stressed out generation like we've never seen before, with bigger issues around suicide and self-harm and anxiety and depression. We've got to create a sense of what has worked in the coronavirus, is that sense of community, that sense of being in it together, you know, that sense of journeying with each other, to have that non-judgmental space. I think what coronavirus has done, as it's put this massive magnifying glass on all the equality that is around our country, particularly around poverty. And you know, mental health is a symptom of poverty. It's also a cause of poverty. And yet it cannot be right that people in the most deprived areas in the UK are dying more from the coronavirus than in affluent areas. And again, I'm saying to the church and to poverty fighting organisations, actually, guys, please work together with us, because you know what? Last time we went through a recession, suicide rates spiked in this country. Virtually every economist is saying we will hit a recession. So we know what's going to happen. So, you know, let's act now. Let's join the dots. Let's get rid of ego and brands and all those things and go, you know what, for the sake of our communities, we've got to have a bit more joined up thinking here. For so long, the church has been quite siloed in its you know, particular movement, and brilliant movements. And you know, we work with, I think, 19 different denominations now, so brilliant people. But I think what people are saying in this spot is we've got to work. You know, we've got to just lose the language of networking and actually do it. Because I feel like we've had the language of networking for years. Actually doing it is completely different, and I think there's a real challenge. I think God's really challenging us. And I think the other thing I think is really significant, when we started up Kintsugi Hope, I remember saying to God, you know, I really want to see a big movie of spirit, but I feel like after all these years of being involved in Christian ministry, if it's going to come in some big warehouse somewhere in America, with a famous person and a famous worship band, and God TV will come and beam it all over the world, and we'll call it revival, I think I might quit. I was like, God, if it could be in small groups in prisons and hospitals and coffee shops and pubs and schools, in brothels, and if it could be in small groups, not led by any great personality, but by the fragile and the sort of getting on the way to getting sorted like the disciples were, I'd be up for that. And I think it's changed that thinking, where we realize actually the big stuff is amazing. It can be amazing. Actually, in the grassroots of community, that's where God, I think, is doing his work, and that's where we need to focus.
Yeah, no, that resonates so much. And so then what is the, because I agree, that is where it is. We're going to see it in the small and in the relational and in the,
yeah.
But then what is the prophetic posture, as it were, of the church in this new landscape? How do we serve our communities? How do we bring about those opportunities for revival? How do we position ourselves differently as we emerge from this lockdown?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite definition of the prophetic comes from Walter Brueggemann, the Old Testament scholar, who said the role of the prophetic is to evoke grief at what is lost, but create amazement at what is possible. And I think that is so superb, because I think that is what's needed. I think, like, we have lost 500,000 people have lost their lives to coronavirus. 10 million people have had it, and I feel like, you know, we could have different waves of this thing and all that sort of stuff. And there is that, like we said, there is that sense of lament and allowing people the space to do that. I think the second part of that is creating amazement at what is possible. That's the hope. Is more than optimism, actually. Hope is so much more than optimism, and I think that's how we position ourselves in the communities. That's how we get alongside our neighbours and our friends. That's how we try and do things with people and not just for people, which I think is really important. And one of the beautiful things we've seen in Kintsugi Hope is just the amount of non-Christians that have been coming and going, you know what, we could do with some of that self-management tools. We could do with a toolkit to deal with anxiety. We could deal with some friends right now. And I think the boundaries between them and us have actually started to break down, as people that realize that sharing in your suffering is sharing in your common humanity. And just conversations about faith are happening all over the place, as people talk about prayer, as people talk about forgiveness and you know, anger, and I think we just need to be in those places where we are definitely there, and looking at how that combination of, in the Bible, of justice and mercy, you know, so important, and how those two work together is so important in this phase.
Yeah, really good. Really good. Thank you. So, finally then, has there been a verse of scripture that has been stirring with you, resonating with you, walking with you through this last few weeks or days?
Well, interestingly, I mean, there's been lots of stuff that we've been speaking into, and you know, I've been doing a lot around the Emmaus Road story. I just love it. I love the fact that the day after Jesus' resurrection, he spends the whole morning talking to two heartbroken, disillusioned, frustrated friends. You know, a marketing person might have said it would be a good idea to do a big meeting now, or get the message out. And the thing I love about that story,
Who does that? No.
The thing I love about that story also is the ability of Jesus to listen, and not butt in. You know, the fact that they were just talking, and at any point he could have gone, guys, I'm Jesus, it's all okay, everything's going to be all right. It's almost like they had to share their pain, they had to share their story. And then the really interesting thing about that whole passage is that Jesus doesn't even come in at that point and go, I'm Jesus. He starts telling the bigger story of God. How God is revealed through the prophets in the Old Testament. And of course, they would have been aware of, you know, passages, Man of Sorrows in Isaiah. They never put two and two together that this was Jesus. And then as they come to the meal, I love it. Brokenness reveals who Jesus is. He breaks the bread and there's something that happens. And I think it's a beautiful model of how we work in our communities. And it was interesting though, just as I came on this call, when you asked me that question, Psalm 68 came to mind, and 5 to 6, it says this: a father to the fatherless, a defender of the widows is God. He's in his holy dwelling. God sets the lonely in families. He sets forth the prisoners with singing, but the rebellious live in the sun-scorched land. And just that little phrase, God sets the lonely in families. And I think that, you know, wouldn't that be amazing that that could be the family of God? And loneliness, isolation, all those things, God longs for the lonely to be in a family, and I'm praying that's going to be our experience.
And loneliness is the epidemic of our internet right now.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Really valuable. Really appreciate your input on that. Thanks so much, Patrick.
No problem. A pleasure. Take care.